alone at the campsite. In the summer of 2022, I was desperate and frustrated. I had quit my job a few months prior in the pursuit of my own startup, and my business wasn't exactly thriving. After 6 years of IVF treatment, my wife had blessed me with a daughter early that year. And while I was elated to be a father, the stress of being a dad, the financial pressures from the clinic, and the weight of being the sole provider for my family had taken a significant toll in the recent months. As summer approached, I decided I needed a weekend away to clear my head and get back into the grind. I decided to take a 2-night trip, just me and our dogs, to a lake off an old logging road about 3 hours from home. It was one of my favorite spots and I knew the woods there quite well. I packed my things, leashed the jogs, 2 blue Hurlers, and set out early one Tuesday morning. When I got to the trailhead, the parking lot was empty. Middle of the week, I was stoked to be alone. There was a single deer path up to a canyon about 1,200 feet, over 5 miles against the lake, and neither myself nor the dogs met anyone else on the trail that entire way up the mountain. I got to the lake around midday, spent the afternoon fishing and collecting wood and water for the family night. The lake was pristine and quiet, not a soul in sight. I was truly alone aside from the dogs. I found a flat spot on the east side of the lake where the vegetation cleared and I could set up a tent, and I made a small camp about 30 yards from the trail. I would have preferred to go further up the mountain, but it was still early in the season, and when I got to my campsite, the rest of the trail was too snowpacked to continue farther. As it was, I had to navigate over several hard-packed embankments before I got to a suitable area. The icy slush was difficult to navigate even for the dogs, and when we had finally crushed our way over and through a few hundred yards, I made the decision we would be going no further. I set up my tent, hung my pack on a limb, and took my fishing pole back the direction I'd come. I spent the evening catching and cooking fish at the edge of the spillway, and as the sun began to set, the dogs and I made our way back to the tent. Slipping over wet stumps and clumsily pushing through the snow, I stumbled into camp exhausted and ready for fire. As I approached the site, though, I realized some things were out of place. My pack, which had been hung on a limb, was sitting neatly on the other side of the clearing about 20 feet from where I'd left it. Sitting on top of it was a large eagle feather. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The dogs began in a low growl, but as they circled the site, there was no one there. As I approached my tent, a stick had been used to carve an inscription into the dirt outside the entrance. It was 2 U's, one upside down, connected to the other by a thin line, and then further connected by another line to a larger U shape. I'd describe it as a Native American petroglyph in the shape of a bird or an eagle. Uniform, symmetrical, and above all things, fresh. Someone had been there. Someone neither I nor 2 very distrusting dogs had seen, heard, or smelled. Someone who had left no footprints to the snow and mud. Someone who had not passed us on the trail, or whose cars had been parked at the trailhead. My stomach dropped. I felt a presence of being watched, but I couldn't tell from where. I quickly built a huge campfire and was dread watched as the last of the sunlight sank beneath the ridge. That night was a fever dream. Pulling the dogs into the tent with me, I clung to my knife and flashlight, praying that whatever was watching me would leave. It didn't. Throughout the night, I would periodically awaken to a variety of sounds. Yells, shrieks, the snapping of branches. The dogs would sit up, growl and bark until I'd open the screen of the tent and shine my light into the forest. At one point, I had just drifted off to sleep when the dog's low growl woke me up. Thinking I might have to drop on whatever this was, I slowly unzipped the tent and leaned out with my flashlight. Taking a breath, I clicked it on. Standing just 3 feet from me was her doe and a calf. I scanned across her, an entire herd was in the sight. As my dogs lost it, the deer spooked and sprinted back into the forest. A crushing and trampling noise as several dozen deer evacuated the area. As I faded, I heard laughter. The deep laughter of man turned to crying as it escalated, then sobbing, and then to deep growling. Much more boisterous than anything my dogs could make, or even a bear would produce. I held the dogs tightly. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun peeked into the valley, I packed my things and left. I've never been so terrified in my life. Has anyone ever experienced something similar? It's been 2 years and I can't make sense of it. I need answers. I was hiding from your mom. My mom is dead. One of the creepiest stories I know personally is from my best friend when he came home at his house babysitting a friend's kid. The kid, whose name was Junior, was roughly 4 to 5, I want to say. His dad was a courier, so would often be doing deliveries late at night. David, my best friend, was a teen by this point, so being home without an adult was no great task. It's important to mention that his father was a pretty paranoid individual who bought into a lot of fear-mongering in the world, so he had a camera set up all over the place. I want to say this happened in 2014. Anyways, David was busy in his bedroom and is minding his own business. But then we decided to head into his den, where all the cameras happened to be set up. But the den was locked. David knocked on the door to the den, and Junior opened it up. "Why do you lock the door?" David said. "Because the lady," Junior said. "What lady?" David asked. "Your mom. I saw her in the kitchen." The house's living room was directly connected to the kitchen, and if you're standing in the kitchen entryway, you could see the door leading outside. It was one of those screened-in sitting areas. Junior claimed that David's mother was right there in the doorway. Really strange, especially considering David's mother had passed away just about 8 months prior. David was chilled by the remark, but the skeptic in him knew it was likely just Junior's overly active imagination, so he agreed to go and check with him. He brought a kitchen knife. If I'm remembering the story correctly, he walked with Junior down the hallway into the kitchen, where the door was open. The door being open was pretty normal. It was a hot summer day, and the house trapped a lot of heat. David stepped out into the screen sitting area and looked left down the ramp his mother used to get to use outside. Nothing. He looked to the right, seeing the length of the yard. Nothing. Junior was incensed that there was someone there, which is strange considering usually in situations like these, kids tend to feel better after you poke around for them. David couldn't calm them down. Junior was certain. He kept saying, "I saw your mom. She was there." So David bargained with him. "Everything's recorded on the camera, so we'll just look on them, and we'll know for certain whether someone is there or not." So they sifted through the cameras, and David looked for another timestamp around when Junior claimed that his deceased mother had shown up. He stared down all the cameras as the timer ticked on, and nothing showed up. But suddenly, he watched as the camera showed a figure enter his backyard from the front by pulling the latch. An old woman, at least in her mid-60s, confidently walked into her backyard. She had a cloth groceries bag in her hand. She headed up the ramp and stood in their screen seeing area for a few moments. She then reached for the door of the kitchen, cracking it open, then brazenly stepped inside. After some time, Junior saw her in the kitchen and headed to David to tell him. Based on the camera's timestamps, she stood in the kitchen for at least 10 minutes. The absolutely insane part is, she left as David went to investigate with Junior. The camera footage showed him walking around and her leaving as he looked around. When he looked left down the ramp where she'd come up, she'd already wrapped around and actually took the long way around through the length of the yard. When he looked right, he quite literally just missed her. It was generally a matter of maybe half a second. Someone wandered right into this backyard and right into his kitchen, then stood there for 10 minutes in his kitchen doing God knows what. Nothing was stolen, nobody was harmed or anything. Well, anyway, the night went on and nothing came of it. Me personally, I would have phoned the police, but David wouldn't. I think there's this chance that his dad may have had some guns that were acquired through perhaps some non-reputable methods. They were locked away from everyone. Whatever small comfort that is, haha. So David's instinct was that his dad would likely be furious about the police being called. Well, anyway, some time passed. Days, weeks, who knows? I'm not even sure how this information came about, but somehow David was told by either a family member or a staff member that the old woman that wandered into the house had dementia and had an episode and just sort of found herself there by a string of coincidences. People are scarier than anything paranormal. This is a true story of something I experienced. It must have been over a decade by now. I was a kid at the time. My dad had bought this quaint house on the outskirts of a little town. It was a decently sized home with a big backyard overlooking the marshes and unused farmers' fields. And the only entrance to it was either through the house or across the large fields. To put into context how this fits into the story was because my bedroom at the time of living with my dad was situated on the back of the house, facing the big backyard. I remember one night very vividly, some 10 to 12 years later, I was sitting in my room doing digital artwork on my computer. It was something I loved to do as a teenager, and I'd listen to music with headphones on. The way I was sitting had me facing semi away from the big window in my room, the largest in the house. I had my blackout blinds drawn. It was the only room in the entire house that had the light on, and I'd assume from outside you'd see slivers of light through the edges of the folding blinds. I think it was between 2:30 to 3 a.m. I was peacefully minding my own business when I hear a massive slam on my window. It was dull but a loud thud, and what I thought was a shout. My dad was sleeping peacefully in the room next to me. How we didn't hear anything at the time still amazes me to this day. I remember just sitting there, shook, no clue what I just heard, until it happened again. I heard it clear. Somebody was outside my window, in the backyard. Whoever this was had no reason to be there. I remember being too scared to open my blinds. Instead, I got up, just staring at the window, not taking my eyes off it. Something I'm thankful for this day was I went with my gut feeling. My gut feeling was telling me to grab a flashlight and check the front door. This was an old house, so I would have to leave the comfort of the house to enter the barn to get to the main entrance of the house. I remember shining my light through the glass in the window. The window had been frosted film for privacy, but sure enough, I barely got the flashlight lifted 3 to 4 inches of the glass before seeing the coat of whoever was out there. The real kicker? Absolute terror set in when I realized the door hadn't been locked the entire time. I managed to lock it and run inside, and the first thing I grabbed was a bread knife. Not practical, but when your adrenaline and fear is coursing through your brain, it's the last thing you think of. I remember trying to wake my dad, who passed out like a drunk sailor, to see whoever was outside. We never found the man, and he never came back. Had I not locked that door, prank or not, I dread to think what could have happened to me. I've seen some shit in my life, but people will forever scare me.